know what? I'm gonna do one more thing here
Okay.
because it seems like my mic is off. I had to just turn it on. Can you hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you.
It's now better. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna just make sure we're in the same.
Yeah, it sounds like it's coming through the mic, your audio.
Is that better now?
Oh yeah, that's a lot better. Significantly clearer.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. It's like, because I've noticed was the little transmitter I have here was off, and I'm like, oh my god. Okay,
That's something I would do.
so let's start. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Rafael, and I'd like to welcome everyone to my Headshot Photography podcast. Today I have a very special guest. Jonny Edward is in the house. As I mentioned before we started, your name was popping up with my few previous guests, and I decided to reach out to you. I've known your work for quite some time, and as I said, I know your work from your photography and also as you as a person being photographed, right? And also, what was interesting, one of my guests, photograph you. I'm not going to mention the name, but she speak very highly of you, and she mentioned that you are not only amazing photographer, but also amazing person to photograph. So thank you for, as I said, accepting my invitation. And I actually want to talk about both sides of the story, right? Because there's not too many, I would say, photographers who are on the side. Usually you either a model or you photographer, right? It's sometimes it's, so you've done it both. But before we jump into this, I would like to kind of get into your photography world first. And I would like to talk a little bit about how did you get into photography? Because I know everyone has a different story. Everyone can kind of have a path into it. And, some of those stories that are extremely inspiring and interesting. So I would like to kind of get into your path. How did you even get into this photography world? How did you decide, okay, you know what, I want to do this, what I do? I would like to kind of hear if you could share some of those stuff with my audience.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, also, thank you for having me on here. It's always an honor, and I've been a fan of your work and have known your work for a very long time as well. And it's always nice to know that you're being well spoken of by colleagues and friends. So I appreciate you sharing that too. My I would say my journey with photography probably has origin stories in my childhood. So for a number of reasons, legal reasons and other reasons, like I moved around a lot as a kid. So we were almost like a military family, but there was no military. So essentially what that meant was I was always leaving people, places, and things behind. So I was always the new kid at school. I was always having to make new friends. I was always having to get adjusted to new places. And at one point, someone gifted me a Polaroid camera. And so what I was doing as a little boy was I was taking pictures of things that were important to me on these Polaroids, and then I was keeping them in a box. So what that camera did was it gave me an opportunity to hang on to things that were important to me. So I didn't have a lot of security and I didn't have a lot of stability, but I found some security and stability and love and connection through that camera. So that's probably where the seed of that. Now, fast forward, I got away from it. Like I was a multi-sport athlete in high school. I ended up going to college for engineering and biochemistry. So I went the academic route. My family, I was raised in a family that didn't believe that art was a profession. They thought it was a hobby and it's something you do in your free time and your fun time. But if it's hard and it's challenging, you should do it. So I was a smart kid. So they're like, you need to do something that takes advantage of the brains, become a doctor, become an engineer, make a difference in the world. And of course, we all want to make our families happy. So I tried going down that route and I did really well academically. And then once I graduated college, I was planning to go to medical school. That really didn't happen. I ran gyms. I was an EMT. I worked as a consultant for B2B type stuff. I worked in the digital marketing sector. I had like tree trimming and masonry businesses. So I've done everything. I mean, not everything, but a lot of things. And all the while, I think I was searching for something that felt right to me. Like even when I was a boy, I was always searching for meaning and purpose and significance. And I never really found it. And so about a little over 10 years ago, it was probably 11 years ago or so, I was in a really not so great place as a man in person. I was dealing with a lot of depression. I was dealing with a lot of anxiety. I didn't really know who I was or what things were all about. And I was just struggling a lot as a human being. I just didn't, life wasn't very bright or lovely for me at that point in time. And so my partner had suggested that I get a camera. It's something I had always talked about. I told the stories about loving photography, and I'd pick up cameras every once in a while, and I dream about getting a camera and all of this type of stuff. But for whatever reason, I never really dove into it. And so I think out of desperation, more than anything else, I decided to get a camera, and it was a Pentax K3. So a little crop sensor Pentax. And I had used some film cameras and stuff when I was younger, shooting street in Chicago. But I got this little camera, and I remember it arriving, and I was really excited, and I was dealing with so much anxiety that I hadn't left my apartment in like weeks. You know, it was very debilitating anxiety. And so I'm waiting for this battery to charge, and the battery felt like it took 10 lifetimes to charge. All that I wanted to do was turn the camera on, and I'm just, the clock is ticking. And finally it happened, and I put it in, and I got some kit lens with it and everything. And I'm just reading through the manual and figuring things out. And as I'm doing that, I noticed out of my apartment window, I lived across from a place called City Park here in Denver at that time. There was this beautiful crimson red sunset, like just gorgeous. You could see the colors developing, and I hadn't left my apartment because of anxiety. And so I picked up my camera almost like armor, and I went outside and I walked across the street, and I felt like I was going to have an anxiety attack. And I kind of waddled like a penguin and got over there, and I started taking photos of this sunset, and it was reflecting off of the lake that looked like glass, that like perfectly still water. And it was beautiful. It was like a painting, being bounced off glass. And I sat in the grass, and I felt the grass under my skin, and there were kids playing and the sounds. And for the first time in so many months, I felt like I could breathe. I felt like I was again. And so it was this big catharsis, and I was laughing and I was crying, and I'm sure the people at the park thought I was a crazy person. So they started moving away from me. But I was looking at these photos, and then that just reignited, I think, a passion that I had established when I was a young boy. And after that camera never left my side. So no matter where I went, I had it with me, and I was shooting sunsets and cityscapes and flowers and architecture and bugs and shadows on the wall. And then I started photographing people, and I realized I have always loved people. I've always loved supporting people. I've always loved learning about people. And I'm like, oh, now the camera gives me a conduit to do that. And then at some point, people were like, hey, you're a fashionable guy. You like style. Maybe you should try your hand at fashion photography. And I started doing that. And I never really envisioned it becoming my professional occupation. It was just a passion. And then finally, people just started paying me. Like, I didn't want to ask for money. I didn't even know how to ask for money. But they were like, Jonny, you're great at what you do. Take my money. Where they were like shoving it in my boots, And I was like, don't give me money. And then it just became a thing. And so then when I actually started getting paid, it dawned on me. I'm like, wow, I might not be able to make a living, but make money from this. And then that transitioned into a living. And then I got into studio work, and I found so much joy in the combination of art and engineering. I think it's this really beautiful interface of technology and creativity. And I feel very driven by that. And then the rest, as they say, is history. Once I started getting into studio, people started knowing my work. Then very quickly, people were asking me to mentor them. And so I started at a low level and then got into education. And now we're here. And I guess people know me for my work and what I do. And there's nothing else I can picture doing. I think for a person who's always spent their life searching for meaning, I feel like if there is some sort of higher power or greater consciousness in this world, this is why I'm here. It's here to be behind a camera. It's here to tell stories. It's here to lift people up, and it's here to support fellow artists. And I'm just so grateful.
Yeah. So let me go back a little bit, because I just want to kind of dive into like one of the aspects which you just said. And then this is something it's been on my mind for many, many years. And I think that the fact you brought that at the beginning, I want to dive into this. So you said that, you were in this kind of moment in your life where, you had depression, you have like this anxiety, and photography for you was just a kind of like a medicine, like something which kind of heal you from this mental kind of time of your life where you felt really, really down. And I've actually experienced that similar story. Like, whenever there were some moments in my life where I was extremely down, and photography was one of the things which kind of brought me back to life. And also, through the workshops I've been doing, I had a lot of students who are coming in, and they said, you know what, photography is something that kind of heals me, something that helps me to connect with people, connect with nature, connect me with the world. Can we talk a little bit more about it? I want to dive in a little bit more into your experience. Did you feel kind of the same thing, that, photography kind of heal you from the depression, and kind of like, because I think, we don't talk enough about it in our kind of industry, but I deeply believe that photography has this amazing power to bring a lot of people from the darkest, I would say, moments in their life, because it's just kind of connector to the world, to people. I just want to kind of share a little bit story. I shared in kind of like a previous podcast, but I had this gentleman in one of my workshops, and he was working for corporation. Like, he was really high up, like he climbed up the ladder almost to the top. But at some point, the doctor told him, like, you know what, you have two options. You're going to either quit this job because you're going to get either heart attack or stroke because your stress levels are like straight to the roof, or you're going to find some kind of, I don't know, outlet to kind of get this anxiety and this stress out of you. And actually, he found photography and kind of like reconnecting with people through doing portraits. And he says to me that one of the things what he had to like kind of relearn, that in corporate world, like, he couldn't trust anybody. He was cutthroat, like everyone was the enemy. And doing portraits, like, he had to, like, I had to open up to these people. I have to connect with them. And it was something, like, I had to like learn like a baby, like the steps to connecting with people. So tell me a little more about your experience, and let's kind of talk. Do you agree with this, that maybe at some point we can have photography as a kind of medicine or some kind of therapy for people?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe that it's therapeutic. I absolutely believe that it's medicine. And I think, I think all art, all forms of expression are, but I think photography is very interesting in that it sort of bridges this gap between like the world within us and the world outside of us. So like if you're a painter and you're painting abstract expressionism in your studio, that can be very isolating. But like in a way, photography encourages us and impels us, like you said, to connect with the world, to connect with each other, to connect with nature. And so it is this conduit, I think, for connection, not only to the outside world, but to ourselves. So absolutely. I mean, I would even say that to say that photography healed me is probably an understatement. I would go so far as to say, if I'm being completely honest, I don't know that I would still be here if it wasn't for photography. No. So it was, it was absolutely a lifeline for me, and it gave me place and it gave me purpose, and it allowed me to mediate that anxiety, and it allowed me to work through that depression. And I've been in therapy for many years. I think everyone can benefit from therapy. I've done a lot of work on myself, but nothing has had as significant an impact on me as holding a camera in my hand. It's this really beautiful, quiet way to do that. And I agree. I think it's something we don't talk about enough, and we don't have honest conversations about enough. And it's really, really significant. It's really important. So, like I said, it was me connecting to myself first and foremost, and connecting to that passion. And then I think when we're connected to ourselves, kind of like the story you were talking about with that gentleman, like we have to be connected to ourselves to connect to other people. We can't really genuinely connect to another person if we're disconnected from ourselves. So in a way, it healthily forces us to consider ourselves and to consider people in the world around us, and to operate from more of a place of emotion and love and gratitude versus logic versus analysis versus corporate cutthroatism. And so we really have to do that. So, absolutely. And obviously it's a journey unto itself. There's good days and there's bad days behind the camera, especially if you're doing it for a career. But I think it is a powerful, incredibly powerful healing modality, physically, mentally, and otherwise. And I think we just need more people who are expressing themselves and who are feeling seen and heard. I think one of the greatest plagues of our society is that we're so connected, or so we say, through social media and technology, but we're so ultimately disconnected from one another and ourselves. And I think there's a human longing to be seen. There's a human longing to be heard. There's a human longing to be appreciated and validated to some extent. And photography really checks all those boxes for a lot of people, that allows them to feel and experience those things with regularity and come into a community and find like-minded people and all the things that I think as humans we really strive for. So it has been a powerful force of medicine and of healing for me ever since I picked up a camera again, more than I ever could have hoped for or known or anticipated.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you about we have to be connected to ourselves. And one of the biggest discoveries in my journey was the fact that I had those bad days, and my mood and my kind of like energy was kind of like pushed to the world. And I remember those sessions. I'm not saying they were not successful, but I could see I was just like kind of putting my bad mood and my kind of struggle on these people, and then that's what I was getting from those images. And then I had to learn, like, okay, how I can just like leave the problems and issues behind the door, where I can just connect with people. So so that's another thing what I want to actually mention here, and you just like beautifully kind of described that it's all about that connection. So sometimes I think it's not even about those images at the end, but the experience working with someone and connecting with them. I think that's the beautiful thing about photography. And also, I think we're looking at those images also differently, because we feel not only we don't need just to see the image, but we also see the connection we've built with that person.
Absolutely. Yeah, 110%. I think a lot of people look past that. It's almost perspective bias. So I know from a business standpoint, because I do mentor photographers, a lot of times I'll hear someone say, well, there's this photographer in my market and their work isn't very good and they're making all of this money and I don't get it. And I'm like, because of the experience they're providing for those people, because those people who are purchasing those services aren't looking at the images and seeing technical imperfection or a proper lighting ratio. They're seeing that they were happy, that their family was happy. They're remembering the laughter, they're remembering the tears and the joy. And similarly, we look at things that way. So it is, I think it's a really interesting thing. Like as photographers, you really hit the nail on the head. We are projecting all the time, for better and for worse. And so in many ways, we get to dictate. We're mirrors. So if I come in and I'm in a bad mood and I'm photographing you, you're going to absorb some of that. Naturally, you're going to be in a bad mood. So we do have to leave that psychic debris at the door. And that's one of the things that I really love is, for me, my mind is always going. I'm like ADHD and I'm so high strung. And so I'm always thinking and always wondering and always considering and always analyzing. But when I'm behind the camera, it's almost like an active meditation. The rest of the world sort of fades away and I can just be present in that moment with whoever I'm there with. And for me, that's a really big gift. It's a really beautiful, powerful thing. And yeah, I want to look at my images and feel something. I don't want to look at my images and just be like, oh, well, I did a good job creating relative to the Fibonacci sequence, or my layered light was fantastic and there was enough shadow so it looked like Tarkovsky, or, whatever the analytical assessment is. I want to look at it and be like, wow, that was really powerful. I remember when we both bonded over this, we both talked about this, we both grew up with, German shepherds, I don't know, some semblance of human connection. And I want people to see that in my work. There was a really long period of time when I first got into studio work where I was getting all of these notes from people and they were like, literally, they're like, dude, your work is so clean. Your work is so clean. And I know that, they were younger dudes and I know they weren't like, oh, your work is tangibly clean, but they were saying it was technically sound. And that started to get under my skin. Like I was excited at first and I'm like, wow, like my work is clean. But I'm like, if I were to die today and the epitaph on my tombstone was like, Jonny made clean work, like would I be happy with that? And it was a resounding no inside my own head. So I really had to deconstruct it and realize that I wanted to get back to a place of more emotionality. And the photographers that I love, like Paolo Roversi and Peter Lindbergh, from a technical standpoint, you could really deconstruct their work, but their work is so rich in emotion. And Peter Lindbergh, especially, he was a technically masterful photographer in every sense of the word, but his most iconic images are shot with, little rangefinder 35s as he's walking through the street and Kate Moss has a cigarette and she's flipping him off. And it's askew and it's blurry and it's slightly overexposed, but it's so human and it's so real and it's so tangible. And I think there's something really special about that.
Yeah. So now let's kind of dive in more into, how did you ended up actually doing portraits? Because as we know, there's a bunch of different genres of photography. You could go landscape, you could go, I don't know, weddings, you could go, I don't know, animal photography, you name it. So what kind of drove you towards portraiture? And then we're going to jump into your website and we're going to talk about some of your images because they really amazing pieces of work. Thank you. Which it's really it's just eye-catching, and there's as I said, a lot of emotions and amazing things. So we're going to dive into it in a second, but what I want to know is why did you decide to do portraiture?
So I think for me, like when I was a kid, I was always a very like social, gregarious kid. So even though I had kind of a weird and challenged childhood, I was always the kid who was always talking. I was always asking questions. I was the person, basically I describe myself as the person where if you're standing in line in front of me in the grocery store, I'm probably going to say hello to you and ask you how your day is. So I'm very curious about people in their world. So I think there's that innate element to who I am. And then once I actually started getting into photographing things, well, firstly, when I was younger, I did some street photography. So like when I was in my teens, I did some street work, and I really credit my street work to who I am and how I am these days. But when I picked up a camera again, I think I started transitioning. It was very safe to do landscape because I didn't have to deal with people. I didn't particularly care for people at that point in time. And the sunset was never a jerk to me. So that felt really good. But then I started getting more into street work again, mainly just architecture and very candid stuff. And then I started photographing people on the street. So I would call it candid street portraiture. And that gave me sort of a channel to connect with people and to learn their stories. And that felt really compelling. So I think for me, it was sort of a combination of two passions. I've always had a love for people and for humanity. And then I've always had a love for photography from the time that I was little. And so it was this convergence of these two things. And then as I started to get into it, I would consider creative portraiture. There was this aspect of sort of almost identity studies with people. So, one of my favorite quotes is, within each individual exists a great multiplicity. And I find that very intriguing. So then I decided, I can bring people into my space, or I can go to their space and we can explore who they are. We can explore who they were. We can explore who they want to be. And it felt like this very immersive exploration of fellow human beings. And I just sort of fell in love with it. So it was by chance, I think. And then once I actually started doing it, I was like, all right, well, there's nothing else I want to do. And then obviously there's fine art elements and there's fashion elements and editorial elements. But I really like to think at the core of what I do, it's me and it's a camera and it's the person in front of me. And everything else is sort of secondary or tertiary to that.
Mm-hmm. So before we jump into some specific images, also, if you don't mind, and share a little bit about your creative path, because, through our journey, I know things are changing, right? So you said you started as a kind of, street photographer, where you were shooting some portraits. Then you kind of moved into the studio stuff. So tell me about that path, like, the transitioning from, kind of one style of portraiture into the different one. But also what I would like to kind of talk about it a little bit about your creative process. So where are you getting your ideas? This is kind of like, are you working on them, or you just kind of like have some kind of basic thing you're starting off and then you're building on the top of it? I would like to kind of know a little bit more how you kind of like, kind of putting those whole thing in pieces, and then you're kind of bringing everything all together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, initially when I was photographing people, it was street work, and then it became candid portraiture, and I might be in the city, or I might be in a state park, or I might be, in a coffee shop or something. And so it was very contingent on environment. And I like that. I really like it a lot. I love exploring. I love searching for light. I love searching for interesting texture, but ultimately we don't have any control over that. Right. So as I started wanting to delve deeper into my creativity, I realized, I'm like, well, I need to take lighting more seriously. And studio work was horrifying to me at the time for two reasons. Number one, I'm like, it's a whole new thing to learn, although I'm technical. And number two, I'm like, am I going to lose the spontaneity and magic of my work? If I go into the studio, I can turn on a light and orient the light, but it's not the same as walking downtown and finding light that's bouncing off a window just perfect in this pocket of like chiaroscuro. So am I going to feel as driven? Is it going to be as powerful? But as I got into the studio, I realized I really loved it because it was this blank canvas. The first studio that I started working out of was a cohabitated studio, and it was like probably 150 square feet. I could touch both walls with my arms extended. And there was one window, and the window was great, but the floors were that yellow wood. So the window was great, but it wasn't, because it would bounce that color into the entire space, and everyone would look like they had hepatitis, And so there was all these crazy things to work with. But I had one light at the time. And what I really loved when I got into the studio was I got to run the show. I got to make the critical decisions. I got to define mood. I got to define shadow. So even though I love the spontaneity of outdoor work, I really love the creative control and sort of infinite possibilities of working in the studio. And because I have a strong technical background, I was never one where I'm like, I have to learn light and math and physics. For me, that was exciting. So I was the one going through the manual and looking and being like, this is a fantastic lux. And if I do this and do that. So it was a lot of intrigue, probably too much intrigue. But it was a really exciting journey for me. And then it just sort of built out. And then I became obsessed, because then, like I said, that was the real intermingling of my analytical mind and my creative spirit. So I'm like, all right, I can lend into this engineering background. I'm highly technical, but I'm also highly artistic. And this is a really beautiful blending and melding of those. So I felt like I could be my whole person as I started to dive into studio work. As far as creative stuff goes, initially, I always have believed in like the old master approach to learning, where, if you wanted to learn painting back in the day, and let's say you're learning from Michelangelo, you would spend years recreating Michelangelo's work. I think there's something really, really powerful about recreation. And of course, we have to get to a point where we leave recreation behind so that we're creating our own work. But I spent a lot of time initially deconstructing people's work. So I took workshops and I was on YouTube and, you know, doing all that type of stuff. But I would take an image and I would look at it and I would go, all right, I'm going to look at the catch lights, then I'm going to look at the shadows, and I'm going to figure out, even if it takes me all week, how they lit this. Was it big? Was it small? Was it one light? Was it three lights? Was it on a cyc wall? How did they do this? What focal length were they using? And so it was a very intensive process of reverse engineering. And for me, that educated me more than anything else. There's great educators and there's great programs, but nothing substituted for me being in my space, just figuring things out hands-on. And then from there, it started, you know, I would get on Instagram and Pinterest, and there were so many photographers that I loved and looked up to that I still do. And I wanted to create like theirs, but that was still my own. So I think that process of replication turned into, all right, I'm going to replicate, but I'm going to make this a little bit different. Like, I really like this photo by Annie Leibovitz, but instead I'm going to use hard light instead of soft light. So I like the canvas, but I'm going to go for punchier light. And so I started substituting elements in and out, and then trying to figure out what I liked. I think that was the biggest part of that initial process. Was I'm like, all right, well, what do I want to create? What is driving me? What am I excited about? And then it just led to more spontaneity. Once I got comfortable with the technical side of things and I was less worried about them, I'm a chaotic person by nature. So I think I work best when I have a general idea. So I might be inspired by a film, you know, and like Sputnik is one I just watched again, which is a beautiful sci-fi film, a Russian sci-fi film, and, you know, the mood and the music and everything. So I might have this idea of like dark tones and something that's a little bit futuristic. And then I get into my studio and there's this base idea, but then I just sort of allow myself to branch out from that. By the end of it, I might be shooting something that's Western, you know, so instead of having a space helmet on, they have a cowboy hat on. But I just sort of allow that creative process to unfold. But I usually start with an anchor of some sort these days. So the anchor could be styling, the anchor could be lighting, the anchor could be a scene, let's say a set of backdrops oriented a certain way. And then I start to build bit by bit and piece by piece on that anchor. I still find a lot of joy in creating something definitive. So if I say, hey, I'm going to sketch out an idea and I'm going to recreate this, I like that. There's a sense of fulfillment. But I think overall, for me, the creative process really comes down to being more exploratory, to being a little bit more chaotic and saying, hey, this is a like you had said, a vague idea. Here it is here. I'm not going to define what it looks like here, but I'm just going to give myself to the process and we're going to sort of see where this goes. And I think that's when I produce my best work, because I'm not overthinking. I'm not overanalyzing. I'm just allowing myself to exist in that flow state. And without all of that internal criticism, I think we're more connected and therefore we're creating work that potentially is more significant.
So tell me how your work evolved over the last, let's say, 3-4 years. Because, like, you know, photographers are like wine, right? The older they get, the better they get. So tell me a little bit about, like, when you look at your work, let's say from, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, and now where you are right now, like how your creative process kind of like changed, how your work evolved. Tell me a little bit about it, because I know a lot of photographers out there, like, I'm not saying they're getting stuck, right? But you know, they getting to this kind of moment where, like, okay, you know, I figured out the technicalities. Now I'm trying to push a little bit creativity, but the work is just kind of stuck there, right? But it seems like, you know, looking at your work, you're constantly evolving, right? And especially in our industry, you know, like you cannot get stuck, because if you get stuck, like you hooked, right? Like you have to producing more work, you have to kind of expand things. So when you look at back for the last, you know, few years, what is the most significant kind of thing with change and, you know, that impacted your photography and your work?
I think one of the biggest things was, you know, like learning the rules and then following those rules and then embracing breaking those rules, or the idea of those rules, if that makes sense. So if I look back 4 years ago, I was very hyper fixated on the technical side of things, you know, so like my lighting ratios, I was only using strobes. I was shooting at 5.6 or f8. There were no dirty frames. My lines were all straight. I was thinking of rule of thirds and Fibonacci. So it was a lot more technically oriented. I would say I was more of a technician than an artist, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I was hyper fixated on creating within the confinement of what I believed was a good photograph. So, you know, those arbitrary rules that we have in our industry. And I think at some point I had to do like a very hard evaluation, going back to emotion and going back to Peter Lindbergh and going back to Paolo Roversi, especially Paolo Roversi. You know, if any of you are watching this and you don't know Paolo, he has beautiful, beautiful work. And he's been working with most of the major fashion houses for like 5 decades. And he works with a large format camera, and he has these 30 and 60 and 120-second exposures, and he paints with a flashlight, a mag light. And so there is no sharpness in his images, and there is no actual reproduction of reality, but I love it. I have so many of his books, spent so much money on his books, but I go through these books and they're so beautiful because they're so surrealist and they're dreamlike, and they transport you to another time and place. It's not what he's seeing in front of him, it's what he's feeling and experiencing in those moments he's sharing with other people. And so I started to really question myself. I'm like, well, if this is the type of work I love most and I aspire to, why am I hyper fixating on these technical norms so much? So I started giving myself a little bit more space. Same thing. Like, I love Annie Leibovitz. I love her environmental work. I love the dirty frames. I love seeing the flags and the scrims and everything in her scene. I love those rough edges, but I was keeping all of those out, and I was keeping everything so pretty and proper and kempt. And so I just gave myself a little bit of freedom to say, hey, there is no right and wrong. Stop thinking in binary terms. Stop thinking in arbitrary terms. There's no right or wrong. There's just different. Give yourself a chance to try this. If you like it, keep it. If you don't, try something else. And then I started leaning into more what I would consider to be expressive work. At that same point in time, I started experimenting with constants more than strobes. And for me, I was like, well, you have to shoot with the strobe and you have to shoot at f8 because you have to be able to see every single eyelash on your model. And I'm using a Sigma lens, and the Sigma lens can resolve exactly 61 megapixels of sensor data. And I know that it's saying, and so all of it was like a spec sheet for my work. And I started going, all right, it's not that important to me. Like, yeah, I can shoot at 1.2 instead of f8. Yeah, I can shoot at ISO 3200 instead of 100. So it was really just a letting go of all of those technical considerations where I still wanted to create technically sound work, but that became secondary to creating work that felt more emotional, that felt more cinematic, that had more impact, that was more rooted in humanity than technical proficiency. And then I just kept giving myself more and more freedom. I started shooting with film a lot more again. I started adapting old analog lenses. So literally, I just took off the chains that I had placed on myself for what construed a good photograph or a proper photograph. And I started chasing what I liked. I started saying, I don't care if there's a person on the forum who's like, well, good work, son, but it would have been better if you didn't crop them at the elbow. I'm like, I don't give a shit, pardon my language, but I don't care. This isn't for you. This is for me. But it's hard. I think it's really hard because we want validation and we want acceptance. And especially when we reach out for input, oftentimes the people who are giving input are people who probably shouldn't be giving input. I see that all the time online where someone will ask for something and their image gets destroyed. And I'm like, all right, let's say the guy's name is Bill. And you look at Bill's work and you're like, Bill, you shouldn't be giving anyone advice on how to create good work because you're not creating categorically good work. That's a whole other conversation entirely. But I think that's what it really came down to. And so, I started embracing blur, and I think overall, to answer the question as succinctly as possible after that verbose bit, I started embracing imperfection. So I started really embracing this idea of imperfection because ultimately I believe that we as human beings are imperfect. And so if I'm trying to accurately photograph a person in a way that's significant and powerful, if I present a photo that is perfection, I'm doing a disservice to the person in front of me because we inherently are imperfect to some extent. And don't get me wrong, I still love that. I'm still a nerd and obsessed with gear stuff. I still love seeing people producing medium format images with a phase 1 and zooming in 10,000% and being like, oh, I can see a pore from a full body portrait. That's mind bending. Look at the reproduction of skin tone. But that became more of just a fascination rather than a fixation for my work.
Absolutely. You touched so many interesting points. And then the what is fascinating for me, it's like, you sharing your work, and I would say majority of people just try to rip every pixel apart and pick on everything. And then, and what is also fascinating that, sometimes we get those positive comments and we just put them onto the side and we just focus only on the bad ones. Right. And then you have this one, as you say, Bill, who didn't do much in his life, but, he's the expert in all this, genres of photography. But that's I think we all experience that. But I think with the time we just growing the skin and then we don't care anymore, right? But
of course,
that's also takes time. So I think right now it's a good time to jump into your work. And I want to kind of go into your site. But what I would like to do, if that's okay, because I know every image has a story, right? The stuff what we see, it's a one thing, but there's probably long story for each image, how
course.
come to existence. There's some stories behind it which we don't know. And I think this is one of the most frustrating things for me as a photographer, and kind of like, someone who also loves look at others people work, that we just see the outcome, right? We just see the
Yeah.
final image, but we don't see the full story behind it,
course.
and then that's what sometimes which. So what I would like to do, I would like to kind of go maybe for your site, and maybe there is some interesting stories on some of those images which you would like to share. So let's kind of scroll down, and maybe you can pick those images which they have something interesting to share, and kind of give the bigger perspective how that image come to exist, and then there's maybe some deeper story
Yeah.
behind it. Okay.
Well, we could even start with this first image of the woman in kind of the crown.
Yeah, that's what I was planning to do.
I have to say, everyone, forgive me. I haven't updated my website in about 6 months, so I'm looking at this right now, feeling embarrassed because I have a whole new body of work that needs to go up on my website. But this is interesting. And so I guess one thing to address too for me is going back to like how my work has shifted. One other relevant point about that is I used to shoot for single images. So I would bring a person in and I would shoot a series, and I was going for it's like the Cartier-Bresson, like decisive moment. I was looking for that single image that represented everything. And the problem was, for me, I never felt like I was quite getting there because there was so much I wanted to say within the confines of that single image. So another thing that I started doing was shooting series. So I started becoming very driven by photographers from the past who shot series. So like if you click into this, the photo of the woman wearing the crown, and her name is Sam. But if you click into that, it'll actually open up a series of images with her. So each one of these is kind of a header image, but each one of these on my website represents a bigger series. Now, I won't deconstruct all of these images, but I will say creatively, shooting series allowed me to say more, to almost create a mood board or a storyboard. And that really freed me up creatively. If you go onto my Instagram, normally there's 10, 15, 20 images of a single person. And it might be the same styling, it might be different styling, but that really allowed me to free myself up, where I didn't feel so confined to have to do a single thing and get everything I wanted to out of that single frame. But if we go back to the top photo, and we can click into that to kind of maximize it. The interesting thing about this is I created this photo at a workshop that I had here at my studio where I'm at right now in Denver, just outside of Denver. And Sam she is an amazing model, very clearly, beautiful skin, beautiful bone structure. And we've known each other for years. I think Sam was one of the first people I actually photographed when I started getting into fashion. So we have a long-standing working relationship and friendship. Now, Sam would be the first person to say that she can be mean. And I'm sorry if anyone takes offense to this, but she is a self-proclaimed bitch. She's like, I'm a bad bitch. I have an attitude, deal with it. And so that specific day, Sam was coming in and she had never been to my studio, this new studio at the point. So I'm teaching my workshop and I had missed her phone calls. Apparently she was calling off just constantly because she couldn't figure out where my studio was. So by the time she actually walks through the door, mind you, we're like brother and sister, she is in a really bad mood. She's like, I almost left. I almost didn't come back. I didn't want to be here, this, and that. And she's super fussy. And now I have a room full of 8 people who are here from around the world. And she's just wrecking me. She's laying into me. And I'm like, all right, we're going to take this. And I explain my relationship to everyone. And when that happened, I was like, Sam, do you still want to be here? Are you still okay being here? I'm so sorry. I own up for messing this up. But do you still want to be here with us? And she's like, yes, I do, but I just want to get started. And so I had this crown in the back, and this is couture styling from a friend of mine, Elizaveta Poradina. Not Elizaveta Poradina, that's a photographer, Eliza Vlasova. So these are designs from Eliza Vlasova. But in my mind, I'm like, I want to present her in this cold, austere, queenly kind of way. Because her energy at that point was cold. It's like we weren't even friends. You know, she was giving me the cold shoulder and all of her energy was cold. So I'm like, I want to do something that's a little bit dark, that's a little bit macabre, that's a little bit removed. And so as we started putting this look together, it's all leather, it's all dark. The crown even, they're all, cool tones. It's lots of black, lots of dissonance. And so that just felt right for her mood. And then once we got out there, the way she was standing in this, it's like her chin was up, her shoulders were back, and she was just like, don't mess with me. And I was like, perfect, right? She's embodying the energy perfectly. And so even when I started to light this, what I did was I had a single 7-foot umbrella and a constant light, and it was dug really deep into the set and then feathered back toward the camera. So we're just getting that nice play of light, that rim light on the side of her face, but she's falling into shadow. So even that aspect felt like her energy, because I didn't feel like she was completely present with us. You know, part of her wanted to be there, part of her didn't. So all of the styling, all of that photo really reflected that. And then I chose a gold backdrop to lean into the regality, to lean into those things, but the gold also has blue in it. So from a tonal perspective, obviously cooler tones tend to be dissonant. They tend to be sadness. They tend to be melancholy. They're not very cozy. They're not very attached. So that whole image just sort of spontaneously emerged. I knew I wanted to do something high fashion and kind of couture with her, but that got anchored around her mood, because she was in such a shitty mood. I was like, let's just run with this and see what we get. And that ended up being my favorite photo that I created at the workshop, because everything just came together so well. Her appearance, her mood, the energy, the styling, the lighting. And the lighting here, what I love too, is it's so simple. Very rarely do I work with one light. But in that case, there was a little ambient light in the studio, but just that big 7-foot umbrella feathered really far toward the camera, getting the gradient onto the backdrop, and then that gradient of light across her. It worked so well, so simplistic, but so effective. But yeah, that was a good time.
But you know what is interesting? But it's interesting how, you know, amazingly, you could just go with the flow and, you know, feel the mood and then not fight with it, but just kind of go with this mood and create something which just basically fit, you know, as you said, her mood and the whole kind of, you know, situation. That's pretty cool. So my question to you, did you have a chance to talk to her afterwards?
Oh yeah.
And then, you know, like,
she loved it. Yeah, we totally made amends, and she loved it. And she, you know, there was a lot going on in her life and my life at the time, and we're obviously we're still great friends, and she loved the photos. So I think once she saw the photos, she's like, all right, it was worth it. These are amazing. I love the photos. I love you. But I think one of the biggest assets that we have is to suspend expectation. I think one of the hardest things for us as artists, especially those of us who are a little bit more technical or a little bit more analytical, is we get an idea in our head and we become so obsessed with the idea as it exists on that point that we don't allow ourselves to move laterally at all. So we become so hyper fixated. And it's kind of like, if I tell myself that I need 2 strobes to create great work, and then one of my strobes isn't working, what do? Because then in my mind, I'm like, well, I can't create great work with only one strobe. So I think we have to free ourselves up, and it's a skill. I mean, we learn that over the course of time. If that would have happened to me when I first started shooting, I probably would have had a panic attack and went in the bathroom and cried, you know? So 10 years into the journey, it's a lot easier to pivot, but I think it's just, it's this idea of being spontaneous and just knowing it's all going to work out. I want to create a powerful image. I don't know what that powerful image is going to look like specifically, but if I'm focused on the mood and just the general idea, I give myself a lot more room to move and explore creatively and to not be so dialed into one singular thing. I think that's really important.
Yeah. So tell me, let's say about this particular shoot, because you said it was a workshop. So when it comes to your creative work, you know, so you coming up with these ideas, or you have, you know, working on that idea with your subject, or this is like entirely in your hands, and you know, whoever's just working with you coming in and they have to basically follow your lead on this, or there's like a little bit of collaboration? Because, you know, based on that photo shoot, it seems like, you know, was well planned, and then, you know, like, you know exactly what you're going after, right? I know there's few things which switch based on the situation, but, you know, creating this kind of mood and this kind of like outfit and then crown and all this stuff, it's not something you just kind of doing you know, like overnight. Like it's a little bit of more preparation for something like that.
Absolutely. So I think, you know, whenever outside of the context of a workshop, if I were to be doing a creative project on my own, I always try and create a dialogue. So like generally I like working with people who I find interesting, who have interesting features, you know, are just unique to me. So it's like, if I would have been working with her in that capacity, we probably would have had a conversation beforehand, like, hey, what are my ideas? What are your ideas? What's a convergence? And especially if I'm working with a model, you know, if I have a concept in mind, if at all possible, I want them to bring things to the table too. So if I send them inspiration, I'm like, how are you feeling about this? Do you feel good about this? Is there anything else you want to try? So I want to make sure that everyone feels seen and heard in that creative process. Of course, you know, if it's commercial work or if it's commission work, that's something else entirely. But it still goes back to that general idea. For Sam, for that particular photo shoot, I knew I wanted to present her in a sort of high fashion couture kind of way. So, you know, I work from minimalism up to maximalism. And I knew for her, because of her energy and her bone structure, I wanted it to look like a edgy, high fashion European editorial. So I knew that for sure. I had the idea for the general outfit. I didn't know the crown was going to come into play, but I had that crown laid aside because I knew I wanted to use it at the workshop. So overall, I had a general mood for her and a general idea. And then those other pieces sort of came in on top of that. Now, like I said, sometimes I'll plan something out to the teeth. So sometimes I'm like, this is exactly the background. I'm going to use moody lighting. We're going to use 4 lights. This is the exact wardrobe and stuff. But even if I do that, I still try and give myself a chance after the fact to say, all right, we've got what we know we wanted or needed. Now let's take some time to just play and see where this goes. So I always try and vacillate between having a general plan, but then also being somewhat spontaneous and a little bit chaotic to some extent as well.
Okay, that's perfect ending, because this is going to lead us to the next shot. I want to talk about a little bit this, because I know there will be, all this, trolls coming out of the woods, oh, this is not sharp and all this stuff. But I want to, because it's really inspiring, and I really love those images. So tell me a little bit about that particular shoot. What kind of inspired you? The entire concept, because it's pretty unique and pretty cool.
So this is Anna, and Anna's a absolutely spectacular model and human being. She's one of those like muses that's so fun to work with, because literally she's game for anything. If you were like, hey, we're going to put you in a bathtub full of spiders and pour candy corn on you, she'd be like, I love it. Let's go. We're going to make it beautiful. So she's just, and she's more like an actress and a dancer. So she's just very malleable. And we shot probably 5 or 6 things this day. But I was feeling very inspired once again by both Paolo Reversi, and there's a photographer a lot of people don't know, and her name is Sarah Moon. And Sarah Moon also has extremely surrealist work. And so you can see here, not only did we shoot the blurred stuff, but things that were a little bit more, I would say not necessarily traditional, but it's sharp, everyone. So there's sharp photos too. But for that top photo with the gold, I had that backdrop. And so in my mind, I was thinking something Grecian and this and that. And that's actually a shirt that she has on her head. So someone had left this shirt. It's kind of like a little spaghetti strap shirt. And as soon as someone left it, and they're like, just keep it. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I want to put this over someone's face. It felt like chainmail. So I didn't know exactly what. So I had that laid out for Anna. And then she actually brought this dress. And so she showed me this dress as we were going through things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the dress and that headpiece, that's going to be perfect. And then someone had just gifted me those pillars that are in a few of the photos. And I'm like, all right, it's kind of Grecian. It's kind of Roman. It's kind of surrealist. I'm in this Dali state of mind. I'm in this Reversi state of mind, this Sarah Moon. So we put that all together. And I actually started shooting with more standard settings. So I was shooting at a shutter speed that was obviously getting things in focus, where there was no blur. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to go down to around 1/20th of a second or so. And I'm going to allow myself to get some motion blur. We're going to get some subject blur. That one specifically I love. And I started looking at the images, and I try and allow myself to operate intuitively. So when I saw the way that this looked, with her face partially obscured and she's semi-nude, and it's implied, but all of that together just felt very compelling to me. So it felt very expressive. It felt very powerful. I like the anonymity. She's such a strong character that I like that you wouldn't necessarily know who this was. So instead of focusing on, a normal portrait where we have eye contact and catch lights in the eyes, this was more of like a gestural sketch. It was an expression of shape and movement and color and tone. And it turned out to be really, really beautiful. So that, once again, it was a general idea. I knew I wanted to do something that was sculptural with her. I knew I wanted to use that headpiece. And then she happened to bring the dress. And then the colors I felt worked well. And there's no strobes. There's no constant lights here. This is literally just the windows in the front of my studio. So that happens a lot too, where I'll set up, 6 lights in the studio, and we're doing something like my Zoom setup. And we walk to the front of the studio for a moment, and they're standing there in front of the window. And I'm like, why did I bother setting all of this stuff up? The natural light's so beautiful. Yeah. And then sort of falling back to that. But that's sort of, and then obviously there was the stuff with the red in there, and we shot a lot of other things that day. But for that session, that's a prime example. I think we photographed 3 or 4 looks, the gold and then the red and a few others. And they all sort of had their own mood. They all sort of had their own personality. And for me, it was a way to highlight different aspects of her and to play with lighting and styling and presentation, and just sort of see where it went from there. Absolutely.
Well, it's a kind of fascinating that, we can open up to any ideas, right? And anything can kind of, from like, even as you said, you have a concept, you have an idea, but then this whole thing can just kind of transform into completely something different, right?
Well, and I love the fulfillment of that. To be completely honest, it's like I love the idea of challenges. It's like I want to do a YouTube at some point where someone's like, Johnny, you get a Canon Rebel and you get a flashlight and you're in a bathroom and you have a bed sheet. Make it fashion, make it work. I sort of love it. I grew up very, very poor. So we didn't have much growing up. I didn't have a lot of resources. So I was always learning to make do with things. I was always repurposing things. I was always upcycling things. So I take a great deal of pride in being able to create a lot with very little. It makes me happy and it makes me feel very fulfilled creatively.
Yeah. And to be honest, sometimes you don't need much. You just kind of see, as you
Exactly.
said, like, even this like a shirt or something, you see, I don't know, some patterns, something interesting into it. And then automatically you have already those, ideas how you can implement that into the photo shoot and make this interesting and beautiful and stuff. Right. So I think sometimes limitation also is good, because if you have too
Agreed.
much, then you're getting
Absolutely.
confused. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's so funny you should even say that, because like my studio now, it's about 3,000 square feet, and I probably have 120 backdrops, and I have 25 constant lights, and I have 10 strobes. And so there is a part, and I'm very grateful, don't get me wrong, having all of that at my disposal is really nice. But there is a longing at times for that first studio that was 150 square feet. I had one light, I had one backdrop, because then you're focused on what you're actually doing with the tools instead of getting lost in what tools you can use. And when people come into the studio, it's hard because I'll rent the studio out to fellow photographers on a limited basis. And I'm like, what do you want to do? And they look around, they're like, I have no idea. Because when you can do anything, you have to decide what one thing you actually want to do. And that can be very challenging.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this shot.
Okay.
Because I love headshots.
Yeah.
And everything what is kind of interesting, always inspires me. So tell me about that story, because I know I was shooting actually a project for women with alopecia.
Yeah.
And that was kind of also interesting project for me, how those people who they have some healthy issues, how resistant they are to the camera, and bringing someone to the front of the camera and expose themselves. I think it's extremely brave for them, and I
Agreed.
always admire these people.
Yeah.
But tell me about your experience with that particular photo shoot.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, my favorite thing, once again, is to photograph people. And it's like, I love photographing everyone. Let me say that as a blanket statement, but I'm very driven by photographing individuals who feel unique and atypical. So in this case, this was also created at a workshop. It's something that I produced, I think 3 years ago with my friend, Aaron J. Young. So he's a really brilliant photographer out of LA, great portrait artist. And we were looking at what types of models we wanted to come to the workshop. And he had worked with Bailey, who this is, previously. And I saw her in his portfolio. And I was like, if there's anyone that I could photograph from your book who's in LA, I want it to be this woman. So he reached out to her, and she was just, down. She was like, yes, I absolutely want to do it. And so Aaron and I both had our own setups, and I was actually working with strobes in his studio. But one of the backdrops that he had, if we go back up to that primary image, the headshot, one of the backdrops that he had was this color. And so she came in, and I didn't know what her hair was going to look like, but with her vitiligo and the darker patches of skin with more melanin and the lighter patches without melanin and her hair tone, she had walked by this backdrop, and I was like, magnifique. I was like, oh, chef's kiss. Like the play, the texture play with her skin and the tonal play with her hair and skin. It was perfect. So that was one of the key shots. I knew in my mind I wanted to get something, and she has beautiful style, and obviously she has a great figure, but I just wanted her face. I didn't want any of the distractions of clothes and styling and elements. I wanted something very direct and head-on. And so this was a 2-light setup. I think I had like a 4-foot octabox coming in from the left, feathered, and then there was a large modifier. It was either a lantern or a 7-foot umbrella. So a very basic 1-2 key fill type of setup where we had some dimensionality, but we were still filling those shadows. And then I just wanted something that felt organic. So I just wanted it to be her and present, and I didn't want it to be overly stylized. And I just wanted to focus on her face and her eyes and her character, and obviously that environmental integration with that backdrop. And I have this printed in my studio still. I love this portrait so much. And the other thing that I love about it is so much of my work can be fanciful. It can be whimsical, and it's so aggrandized. And this is just camera, background, 1 or 2 lights, person, straight on, no BS, no tricks of the trade, no crazy focal length, no nothing, just presence with the person in that time. And I remember we had a conversation before we talked about this, and she was like, Johnny, what type of mood do you want? And I'm like, I want you to be you. And she basically said something that Sam said, very similar. She's like, well, I'm a baddie. She's like, you're going to get all my attitude if you want me to be me. And I was like, give me all the attitude. I was like, give me all the attitude, Bailey. Let's go with that. And she just looked right through the camera and right through my eyes and right through the back of my head and soul in this photo. And I took that photo, and obviously I shot more, but for me, that was it. That was the decisive photo. Even though I rarely shoot for one anymore, I was like this, I could leave happy with this single shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I think everybody who's looking at that shot, she just like threw you, right? Like you
Yeah,
just feel it.
so
You,
intense.
you feel the tension, you feel the emotions, everything. It's amazing. Okay, so let's because I know we could go probably for another couple hours going through those shots, and I
Absolutely.
hope we're gonna be able to come back at some point. But I
Oh,
have a
please, I'd love
couple
that.
more questions.
Please.
So I want to basically jump and switch the gears completely, and
Okay.
I we talk a little bit before we kind of went live. I want to talk a little bit about the AI because this is the
Okay.
hot topic nowadays.
Yep.
It seems like it's a massive disruption in our industry. There's two opposite sides. Some people who are more open to it, and just trying to figure out what it is, what it does, how we can utilize it, how we can implement it in our work. But there's the other side, and I know there's a lot of kind of gray area
Yeah.
with AI, and then we could have a probably very long conversation about it. But what is your take on it? Like how you look at it. What's your opinion? I would like to kind of hear as a very established and known photographer with very um, strong body of work, how you look at this new technology, like literally not even knocking on our door, but already it is here, right?
Oh,
And
infused into everything.
exactly. So how you look at this whole kind of new technology coming to photography?
So I think, like I had mentioned before, I have a strong technical background, so I'm fascinated. I'm wonderfully fascinated and intrigued by it. I think, what we've seen, what it can do, and how it's grown exponentially in such a short period of time is mind bending. And it's
Mhm.
sort of surreal. Personally, I have a couple of different viewpoints about it. I
Mhm.
absolutely think that there are concerns. I think there are ethical concerns, for
Absolutely.
what's being used in even when I speak about ethics immediately, it's like, how is artist work being used? But then also, how is this being leveraged for things like disinformation, for things like propaganda,
Mhm.
and that's a conversation unto itself. There's an environmental impact that I think needs to be considered with this. But overall,
Yeah.
I think like anything else, it's an emerging tool. It's like, how are you using this? How are you integrating this? How is this supporting you as an artist? How is it building up? How is it breaking down? And so my personal thing is, I played with Midjourney and I played with Dali, and it's really intriguing to me.
Mhm.
I'll put my own face in there, and it's like, make me look like Batman and have me on the Gotham cityscape, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. So it's really, really intriguing to me. So I think I've loved seeing it integrated as a tool for inspiration for photographers.
Mhm.
There's a few photographers out there who I've seen where they're like, hey, I was playing with generative imagery and this is what happened, and then I built a dress because of it, or it helped me refine lighting, or it helped me define a set. So I love it as a creative tool. I also love that it's allowing people to connect with the creative aspect of themselves. I think something else we don't
Mhm.
talk about enough in this industry is the privilege of creativity. And when I say that, if you have a studio like I have, and you have friends who are designers, and you have friends who are makeup artists, and really great models, I can say, oh, the latest campaign from Gucci came out. I can recreate that in my studio. That's not the same for someone who, let's say, is in a South American country or another country in the world where they don't have access to those things. They might not even have access to a
Yeah.
camera. They don't have the resources. And this gives them an ability to explore their ideas, to explore creativity. And I think that's wonderfully beautiful. I think that's
Mhm.
incredibly, incredibly powerful. My qualm personally comes with people using the imagery and passing it off as photography. I think that's sort of a moralistic ground, and people are using
Mhm.
that to do things, and it's like, well, look at my photographs, and it's like, well, just is it an intriguing art form? Yes. Unto itself. Is it an intriguing technology? Yes. Is it photography? No. And there's
No.
nothing wrong with that. That doesn't make it good or bad, but it's not. And I would even say the same things about composite work. If something is heavily composited, I have friends who are world-class composite artists. But do I think
Mhm.
that that's photography in the truest sense? No, I think that's an intermingling of photography and digital art. And so I think that, sort of definitions and encapsulations are important with that.
Mhm.
I have friends like Jinya Zhang, who's had, a lot of issues with like copyright and her work being scraped and
Mhm.
used, not just by AI, but also by painters and artists of other mediums.
Right.
So, the intellectual property thing of it is sort of interesting, but I am of the mind where, it's here. It's absolutely
Mhm.
here. It's absolutely not going anywhere. It's absolutely going to become more advanced. It's absolutely going to become more pervasive. And so you either find peace with it and you find a way to integrate it, or you find peace with it and you don't integrate it. But I don't think that I don't think that taking a staunch stance against it is necessarily productive, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So I think everyone should have the right to their own opinion. I absolutely believe in that. And I would never chide someone for having their own opinion. For me personally, I probably won't integrate it a lot in the generative sense as far as making actual imagery, but I'm using the tools on the back end like crazy. I'm using generative fill. I'm using AI-based algorithms in retouching and Capture One. So that's also kind of a funny thing to me too, where there's a selective moralism about it, where someone's like,
Yes.
oh, I can't believe that Rafal made something in Midjourney. Now I'm using AI retouching tools in Evoto and I'm substituting backgrounds out, but what you're doing is wrong. And it's like, well, you can't decide that this is okay and this is not. You know, it's all part of the same machine, so to speak. And I think there's a lot of selective moralism with a lot of things. So I love the tools. I love what they offer to people. But for me, it's purely just a personal choice. And that's because I don't necessarily feel, I mean, even in IOTA is fulfilled creating something in, let's say, Midjourney as I do creating something in my studio. So everything in my life comes down to how do I feel relative to how I'm allocating my energy and time. And so for me, I would rather be behind the physical camera. That's not the case for a lot of people, and I respect and appreciate that, but that's just my personal preference. I think also, yes, it's going to be integrated to a greater degree, whether you like it or not, whether you love it or hate it. It's part of society. It's part of culture. It's part of our medium. It's here. It's already being integrated across the board, especially for commercial work. It's being integrated for less commercial work like headshots. It's being integrated in a lot of ways. And I think there's a very curious fascination for me to see where this goes, how it defines art, how it defiles art, you know, how it alters our perceptions of ourselves and one another. I just had sort of an interesting conversation with a friend of mine about this. And one of the curious aspects to me is, if we look back, let's say 50 years and we look at photography and we look at someone like, or let's say 75 years, we look at Avedon or we look at Helmut Newton or we look at Penn or, you know, we look at Leibowitz early on. Those images that they were creating stood out because nothing else existed like them. You know, you have Helmut Newton with a group of models with hats in an empty pool, and one of them has a shotgun, and no, you didn't see it. You remember that image because it struck society. People are like, what is happening? It was disruptive, that image. So now, because we have access to this, I'm very intrigued by what's going to happen to visual literacy. If we have images that are objectively beautiful in mass, that are so accessible, that can be made and generated, and that are flooding social media and flooding our minds, what now defines beauty? How does this affect our conception of beauty, of aesthetic, of power, of magic, of humanism? And it's more of a philosophical inquiry than anything else.
Yes.
So, you know, like anything else, I'm going to take the parts that work for me, and I'm also going to leave the parts that don't. I think we all have that personal choice. But I mean, for me, is there an existential threat to photography? I don't think it's existential, and I don't think it's a threat. Is this going to really change how photography operates on a business level? 110%. There's no doubt about it. Now, I can either say, hey, I'm going to run with this, or on the opposite side, if I don't want to integrate that technology into my workflow, I'm going to focus more on humanism in my messaging. So instead of saying, hey, this technology doesn't exist, or yelling from the rooftops about how, you know, this is going to be the death of photography, it's not, but it's going to change it. Just like digital photography changed film photography, just like moving from wet plates to film and celluloid changed photography, just like mirrorless changed digital photography, moving from DSLRs. So for me, I'm just moving more into humanism. So I don't mind it at all, because I'm like, well, I'm so focused on connection. I'm so focused on providing an experience. I hope every photographer in my area uses AI to generate images, and I'm the only one who doesn't, because now I'm niche. So if someone wants the experience, I hope no one else is giving the experience, because they can only come to Jonny. That's great for me.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've heard that actually opinion, some predictions how this whole thing might unfold. So one of them was actually, they said if the, well, there's two aspects of it. One, if the, you know, AI images going to flood it, internet and social media and everything, you know, the pure photography, you know, become more niche, and you know, people going to kind of be more attracted to it. You know, it's going to make us even more successful, because, you know, that's what people going to try to go for it, right? So like, I know there's a lot of, you know, kind of arguments against and for it, but I want to kind of point on one thing what you said, and this is what inspires me the most about this new technology, is that we can put in live kind of images which only were in our minds, right? Because like we also had some limitations when it comes to photography, right? We had some ideas, was some concepts, but there is always some boundaries which we couldn't move, and there was like financial ones, I don't know, location ones, styling ones, the list goes on and on. But now we can actually, as a kind of creative tool or kind of inspiration, we can bring those images into life. And what I think also what's gonna, hopefully, that's my kind of, I don't know, prediction or something that I would like to see, that we're going to be able to like really expand the creativity beyond those measures, beyond those kind of like limitations, right? And how this creativity, because I've been playing quite a bit with AI, and it's interesting that it's forced you to think outside of the box. As you said, like if you come into the studio where I have all the equipment, all the backgrounds, all the amazing models, and you have everything and you can work with them, you're always getting lost, because you're like, okay, what I'm going to do now, right? Because I have too many options. And I think that's what we feel also with AI a little bit, that, there is endless possibilities. And now we have to really start thinking creatively to kind of get something out of it. And maybe that's going to kind of shift the way even think about it, right? And then I'm hoping that it's going to also impact the photography itself, because, if we're going to be able to use those tools to kind of change the way we think about even photography, and kind of expand these ideas, expand some kind of, because we're going to be able to bring those images to life, and kind of maybe use those ideas and bring them to like a real sessions and real photography. That's going to be quite interesting. And we can hopefully we're going to see some inspiring and very amazing imagery coming up in the next few years.
No, and I love that. I love what you pointed out about the idea of articulation, so it's like it forces you to have to focus on a vision. It forces you to have to like build that vision out. I think oftentimes, when photographers, let's say, come to my workshops, one of the big things is they'll come up to me and they'll go, Jonny, what do you think of this photo? And I'm like, what do you think of the photo? And it's like, well, I don't really like it. What don't you like about it? Do you not like the posing? Do you not like the shadows? Do you not like the lights? Do you not like the angle? And so it's so important for us as artists to be able to articulate what it is we're seeing, to be able to articulate what we want to see. So I can absolutely see it being useful for that. And going back to it, I think, what happens for a lot of artists is, I get it. I understand that it's hard. If you've spent, and obviously this extends so far beyond photography, but if you spent your whole life learning classical guitar, and now classical guitar can be generated and integrated into a song, and someone's not playing it, there is sort of an affront going on there. So I feel for the artists in that respect, but I also, there's a side of this that I think we don't get out of enough with artists, and that's what's the impact on the rest of the world, good and bad. And if we take something like medicine, what this technology is going to do in medicine is brilliant, for things like cancer detection, for things like pharmaceutical development, for all of this stuff. So is there a good side to this? Yes. Is there a bad side to this? Yes. But that's life. The same is true of all things in existence. There's good and bad people. There's good and bad to everything. It's like people have used electricity to do some really horrible things, and we use electricity to do some really amazing things. So I think the aspect is like, how are we using it personally? And there's always a concern about ethics and moralism and integrity, but going back to it, that applies to everything. That applies to photography, that applies to cinematography, that applies to everything else in life. So I think people tend to get really black and white, especially now in the world. So many people are afraid. I think a lot of people want something to hang their hat on, to be angry about. And I understand that. I'm not chiding those people, but they want a single point. They want something to be upset about. They want something to scream about, and they want something to be able to blame a thing on. And is this impacting artists and livelihoods? Absolutely. But like, I can sit back on my laurels in the seat and go, oh, Rafael, the reality is the reason I'm not getting any bookings anymore is because of AI, and it's taken over everything, and I don't stand a chance. Now, instead of addressing the fact that my marketing isn't great, instead of addressing the fact that my sales aren't great, instead of addressing the fact that I'm not striving to get better creatively, I now have this single point that I can sort of assess blame to in mass. So I think there's a bit of that in society as well. So like I said, I think it's here. The bottom line is it's here, and I don't think there's anything wrong. Do you have to use it? No, there's plenty of photographers still who wouldn't touch a digital camera in their life, but they're also not yelling at digital cameras. They're not screaming at people on the streets who have digital cameras and going like, you're ruining film photography. At least I haven't seen that. They're just like, wow, that's cool. You're doing it the easy way. I like doing it this way. And they mind their matters, and they do what they love. So to all of you out there, I would say, if you want to experiment and explore, do it. If you want to create with it, do it. If you want to never use it at all, do it. If you want to edit your photos in Windows Paint instead of using Photoshop with AI algorithms, do it. it's about what makes you happy. It's about what makes you feel fulfilled. And I love seeing people being creative. I love seeing people delving into the depths of their mind. I love seeing people explore. So the amount of people who I've seen exploring with this, I think that it's really, really fascinating in that way. And yes, I think there is a black hole in a sense where maybe someone's going to get into generative imagery, and because of that, they're never going to create an image with a camera. That's okay. But I think for a lot of people, they're going to get into generative music, or they're going to get into generative imagery or generative video. And I think for a lot of people, it's going to inspire them to go and create things in the real world. It's going to create them to pick up a camera or to pick up a guitar. So going back to it, it's always 6 for half a dozen. And with anything in life, we could choose our talking points, and we can stand on a hill, and we can decide that our way is right and everyone else's is wrong. But it's just good and bad, and it's give and take, like all things.
Yeah. But I think everything comes down to, creating in general, right?
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter how you want to create it, just go and create, right?
Yep.
If you prefer, and like as I 100%, also hear what you're saying, and this is one of the biggest arguments which I've been hearing, that I have to dedicate it 10 or 15 years of my life to learn photography, and now just Joe Schmo can kind of prompt something and get something similar. And I think that's, people kind of feel like, but I also think that photographers, because that's what I also see, even working with AI, that the skills we kind of learn through doing actual photo shoot, working with people, working with lighting, we can still implement that in AI, because we can really kind of see things the way that we want to see it, right? And kind of direct it. So, but as you said also, which is kind of also fascinating, that you have to verbalize a lot of those things, which you want to show, or what you want to share, or the vision you have, right? And that's what a lot of photographers, not a lot of photographers, but I think me myself, I had sometimes problems with that, right? Because I had some idea, but verbalize it, like it's just in your head, in your mind, but just kind of spitting this out in the kind of context of kind of writing something that would be probably difficult. So
no, and I agree with you, and I do. You make a really interesting point even about the intentionality. Like, a layperson's probably not going to give a prompt that is, I want a person with chiaroscuro style lighting and Rembrandt with fill light coming from the back, using a telephoto lens at 1.2, and all of the other like descriptors that you're only going to know if you've been in the photography game. And I also think, I don't look at it as a threat. It's, I don't look at it and go, oh, well, it took me 10 years to get to where I'm at with photography, and now someone can create similar work. Well, I don't actually think it's similar work, because my heart is invested into what I'm doing here. So I think it's kind of cool. If someone literally typed in like, give me a portrait in Jonny Edward or Jonny Creative style, I'm like, hey, fucking, that's cool. The algorithm knows me and it scraped me. That's pretty badass. Like, I'm a reference point for people. And if they showed me that, I'd be like, that's kind of rad. I don't feel any threat from that personally. But that's just me. And obviously I have privilege, and I've worked to build my reputation and things up like this. But my whole motto in life is I let go of the things that I can't control, and I put my energy onto the things that I can control. So this is here. I'm not going to try and constrain it. I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to continue to focus on myself and my art, who I want to be, where I want to be, the types of clients that I want to work with. And if I do that, I'm going to continue to be very successful. If I give away my energy, if I give away my time, if I decide to focus on other things, I'm going to become listless, and I'm not going to be where I want. But I'm only accountable to myself in that case. It's purely on me. And that's how I live.
Perfect. So we passed an hour, but I have one more question to you. I'm sure we could talk for about few hours at least.
This could be an all day thing.
That could be an all day discussion for sure. But my last question is, would you mind and share your advice to someone who is getting into this creative world, specifically photography? Because I know a lot of people, and also based on your story, right? You've touched so many different professions, but you found love with photography. And you at some point, like, okay, this is what I want to do. What would you tell to someone who actually is on that edge, right? Someone who would love to do photography, who'd love to create images, would like to shoot, would like to kind of use that art form to express themselves, and they just don't know which direction, because they have all sorts of different pressures that you have to be engineer, you have to be, doctor, you have to be all this stuff. What would you tell to that person?
I would say first and foremost, ideally, to take the pressure off and to just have fun. You know, I think in our society, we have a tendency to want to monetize everything immediately. You know, so someone picks up their camera, and especially if they pick it up later in life, you know, if they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever it is, and they pick up a camera again, it automatically becomes like, how do I make money with this? And that's unfortunate, because if that becomes your main prerogative, you don't explore, you don't experiment, you don't connect with your passion, you don't connect with your voice. So I would say just have fun and enjoy the process. I would also encourage people to explore and experiment. You know, it's like if I would have just decided I was going to be a landscape photographer and I never would have started photographing people, because I define myself that way. I'm like, I am Jonny, the landscape photographer. I take Ansel Adams style photos of mountains. And that's what I did. I would have never found my way here. So I think it's really important for people to try all things. If you're just picking up a camera, shoot flowers, shoot landscape, shoot macro, shoot micro, shoot blur, photograph people, photograph cats and dogs and mice, photograph bugs, do everything. Take your camera and find out what you feel connected to. Don't let the world tell you what to do or how to do it. Don't let the world define you. Find out for yourself, what do you like? And if you like working with 20 lights in a studio, chase that down. If you only like working with natural light, chase that down. If the only thing you like to photograph are, you know, blooms of orchids, chase that down. You know, like focus on what it is that you love and what brings you joy, what brings you peace, what fuels the flames of your passion first and foremost. And work on, give yourself to that process. There's a Bukowski quote, and he was a terribly complicated man, but still, he said, find what you love and let it kill you. You know, and I think there's something really incredible about giving yourself to a passion. So I would say when you find that, when it feels right, be devoted to it. Make a discipline out of it, obsess out of it. One of the questions that I got a lot, and actually people were really pissed off at me for a while, because it kind of went from like people kind of knowing me to a lot of people knowing me in a very short period of time. If you look at the normal timeline for people, and it's like, well, it's because he has tattoos, or it's because he has this. Like, the reason being, if I'm being honest, is I work harder than anybody else. That's really what it comes down to. You know, I didn't pick up a camera and know what I was doing. My first photo shoots with strobes, they all had black bars because I didn't understand sync speed. I've struggled like everyone else. But the reality is, if you look at 1 year, let's say 5, 6 or 7 years ago, when I got into the studio, I was spending 12 hours a day in the studio, 6 to 7 days a week. Every moment I wasn't working, I was creating. And so someone's like, well, you grew so much over a year. That's not fair. And it's like, it is fair, because I sacrificed everything else, because you took 10,000 photos and I took 190,000 photos. Because you did 2 photo shoots, I did 220 photo shoots. So it's nothing substitutes for action. And even if we're talking about generative things, if you want to learn to use a tool like Midjourney, you're not going to get what you want immediately. You have to learn the language. You have to learn how to finesse. So it's like, allow yourself to delve into it and give yourself time. And pardon my language here, but fuck what everyone else says. We get so wrapped up in the judgments of others. It's like, well, my mom said that I shouldn't be shooting boudoir, so I'm not going to shoot boudoir. Your mom, it's not your mom's life. It's not your husband or wife or partner or kids or best friend's life. It's not your cat's life. It's not your reverend's life or your pastor, you know, whatever it is, it's your life. So do what makes you happy and follow your passion and see where it takes you. And it's okay to pivot. It's okay to, in your mind, say, hey, I want to be a fashion photographer. And then you get on set and you're like, oh, I don't like these people. This sucks. I hate it. Cool. Let it go. Move on to the next thing. Like, just allow yourself to explore and experiment. And that's where your voice comes from. I think the biggest thing about that is people always ask me, they're like, Jonny, I know your images when I see them. And that's one of the greatest compliments to me. And I'm like, because I've allowed myself to dive into what I love. If I was creating what I thought you wanted, or what I thought would make Annie Leibovitz happy, or what I thought was going to get me all of the commercial clients I want, I wouldn't have a visual voice. I wouldn't have a signature, because I would be creating the same thing that everyone else is creating for the same reasons everyone else is creating. So the way that you develop a signature and a style is you literally go into the confines of your mind and you say, what do I love? And you do it. And even if you're a headshot photographer and you're making money from that, if you don't love headshots, do something else. Pick up your camera for your own work. Go out and photograph raccoons dressed like Marie Antoinette, like whatever makes you happy, you know. And it's our life. We have this life, and I'll end on something, and I don't want to be morbid, but I think the biggest driving factor for me, it's a Latin term, memento mori, and it just means remember death. And it's I'm not obsessed with it, but I am aware of the fact that I'm not going to be here forever. I don't know what comes after this. Maybe it's heaven, maybe it's hell, maybe it's reincarnation, maybe it's darkness. I don't know. We can't know. But what I do know is I have this time in this life, and it's my responsibility to live the life that I want to live. It's my responsibility to create the art that I want to create. If I want to impact the world, I have to decide to use this time I have to go out and make an impact in the world. So remember that, and just realize it doesn't matter. Like most of this, just ultimately, it doesn't matter. No one cares.
Yeah.
You know, no one really cares that much. If I walk outside dressed in a 3-piece suit, or if I'm wearing a bear costume, no one really cares. You know, it doesn't matter. Just follow your joy, take care of people, be kind, and just live your life, because it's your life. And that applies not just to art, but to everything.
That was extremely inspirational for, I think, everyone who is listening. I think, you know what, sometimes we have to just, as you said, memento mori. It's one of those quotes which, you know, we have to think every day, right? Because we have one life, we have one shot, and then, you know, you have to make it work for yourself. As I said, nobody cares. You're doing things for mostly for yourself. Jonny, thank you so much for this extremely I don't even have words. Inspirational conversation that was absolutely amazing. That was pleasure chatting with you. I hope we can be able to do this again at some point.
Yeah, please.
I will be waiting for updates for your website, so you can share more of your work.
Everyone, now I'm on the hook. Like all of you have forced me.
Now there's no excuses. You know, there's a lot of people watching, so they're gonna probably knocking on your door. Okay, what's going on there?
I have to do it.
I'm so glad we were able to chat, we share some of your work. I know everyone who is watching this probably know you already, so they're familiar with your work, but everyone who doesn't know, please jump in, because it's gonna just, you know, make you kind of, you know, want to be more creative, and then push the boundaries, and then push everything what you have left in your tank, just to kind of create more. So thank you so much. Please don't hang up on me. I have to just kind of run quick outro. And thank you so much again. And I will link all the information to your website, to your social media. And please check Jonny's work, because it's absolutely amazing. And again, thank you so much for the conversation.
I appreciate today.